The theory I bring you today is going to blow your mind because I'm going to tell you the story that hasn't been told and won't be told about God Valley, and I'm going to explain its direct connection to the final war. And we start directly with the theory because there's a lot to discuss. This theory video is surely going to be a very long video, and you probably have it playing in the background while you're doing something else. Maybe you're cleaning the house, exercising, cooking, eating. If so, enjoy your meal. Or it might even be that you have it on to go to sleep. If so, a goodnight kiss. Whatever you are doing while you have the video playing in the background, let me know in the comments, because you know I love reading them and you keep sharing more interesting things. And obviously this kind of video takes a lot of work, so I would really appreciate a big like and a subscription. Now, let's start with the theory. The first thing to explain is that the world of One Piece seems to move in cycles and a predetermined destiny, something that Eiichiro Oda himself has hinted at many times in the series. In fact, the word destiny has appeared explicitly at completely key moments. An early example was when Luffy received his first bounty. Makino commented that Luffy was fulfilling his dream, and the mayor, Cubslap, wondered aloud if it was his dream or his destiny. This idea that Luffy's achievements might be predestined has been underlying since the very beginning of the story. It's no coincidence. Eiichiro Oda has left clues that in the world of One Piece, there is an inherited will that spans eras and certain events, almost as if it were the work of destiny. Another very revealing moment is the final speech of Whitebeard, Edward Newgate. Before dying, he tells Teach that he is not the one Roger was waiting for, hinting that there is someone designated to continue Roger's will. In that same statement, Whitebeard talks about how since ancient times there are those who inherit the will, and predicts that one day a person will come who will challenge the world and carry centuries of history on their shoulders. These words practically describe a kind of prophecy, suggesting that there is a destined path, a chosen one who will fulfill the task that even Roger could not complete in his time. Let's remember that Gall D. Roger himself, after finding Laugh Tale, commented laughing, "Joy boy, I wish I had been born in your era. We arrived too soon." This confirms that Roger realized he had arrived too early to fulfill that destined mission, passing the task to someone from the future, most likely our Luffy. Even characters like Shanks have been involved in this notion of destiny. Shanks himself, speaking with a former member of Roger's pirates, Scopper Gaban, referred to himself as the destined child or the destined man, implying that Shanks had a very special role to fulfill. This is very interesting because it fits with the idea that Shanks has acted behind the scenes to guide certain events, like recovering the Hito model Nika fruit, which ended up in Luffy's hands, something that might not be a coincidence. And in summary, One Piece has shown us that destiny and the inheritance of will are central themes, from the will of D to prophecies like that of Fishman Island, which Madame Shirley predicted that Luffy will destroy Fishman Island, an act linked to the dawn that everyone is waiting for. Everything indicates that there is a course of history that must occur. My personal interpretation of all these clues is that the story of One Piece operates in a kind of vicious circle, with events repeating throughout the ages in a very similar way. In other words, there are cyclical patterns. There always emerges an individual with the will of the type of Joy Boy who challenges the tyrannical world order and the world government, attempting to bring a new era of freedom. And there is always a final confrontation between these forces. This would have occurred not only 800 years ago in the Void Century with the original Joy Boy against the ancestors of Emu, but perhaps repeatedly since then. Possibly every few generations, an heir to that will emerges, a DI with the spirit of freedom who tries to overthrow the tyrant of the time, but so far has always failed, restarting the cycle again. That is why the world government has been ruling for 800 years without being overthrown. After each failed attempt, they erase from history the evidence of that uprising so that the world forgets and the status quo continues. A perfect example of these deliberate historical gaps is the God Valley incident. It happened only 38 years ago, and yet it was literally erased from the map and the books as if it never happened. If the government made an entire island disappear from the records because of what happened there, what might they have done over the centuries with similar events? To understand how Oda might have been telling the end of One Piece for a long time, we must look at two great wars we have already seen in the series. The Battle of God Valley, which happened 38 years ago in the story, and the War of Marineford, which in the present occurred just a couple of years ago in Luffy's timeline, that is, 2 years ago. At first glance, they are different conflicts, but you will see that they hold very surprising parallels, and Oda has created an intentional reflection between God Valley and Marineford. And this is crucial because the great final war that is approaching will follow this same pattern, but on a much larger scale. Let's look point by point at the similarities between God Valley and Marineford because they are the key to deciphering what the final war will be like. The trigger for the conflict will be a kidnapping. Both clashes began because the bad side, the government or the navy, captured someone, triggering the reaction of the good side, the pirates. In God Valley, as revealed in the latest chapters, the kidnapped person was none other than Shaki, who before being the bartender of Sabaody and Rayleigh's partner, turned out to be a legendary pirate in her youth, and was revealed to have been the Empress of Amazon Lily decades ago and the most coveted woman of her time. Her kidnapping shocked the world at that time and attracted the attention of the most powerful pirates. In Marineford, on the other hand, the kidnapped person who was sentenced to public execution was Portgas D. Ace, the son of Roger and a commander of Whitebeard. Both situations set the machinery of war in motion. In God Valley, Roger's crew went to rescue Shaki, and in Marineford, Whitebeard's fleet went to rescue Ace. Oda is telling us that something similar will happen in the final war. Someone important will be captured, their life in danger, and this will cause all the factions of the world to converge for the decisive confrontation. Then we have a young Marine with a conscience who questions the morality of the battle. In Marineford, we saw Kobe, a rookie Marine protected by Garp, suffer a crisis of conscience in the middle of the massacre. He even stood in front of a Akainu, willing to stop the war. Fed up with the senseless slaughter, well, in God Valley, there was apparently an equivalent role, none other than Monkey D. Dragon, yes, Luffy's father. He was there as a young Marine under Garp's command. Recent chapters confirmed a fan theory. Dragon served in the Navy in his youth. It is suspected that what he witnessed in God Valley, the cruelty of the world nobles, and perhaps the injustice of having to protect them, horrified him to the point of deserting. Dragon questioned everything the Marines represented that very day, which explains why years later he founded the Revolutionary Army. It is a very powerful parallel. Both Kobe at Marineford and Dragon at God Valley represent justice within the Marines. Those who see the error of protecting evil, the Celestials or corrupt politicians, and they rebel. Perhaps in the final war, we will see that this archetype is no longer needed, because many Marines will awaken to the truth, or because the final conflict will be so clear, the true face of the government will be exposed, that there will be no doubt about what is right. In any case, it's interesting to note how Oda placed Dragon in God Valley in the same way he placed Kobe in Marineford. Then we have the point that someone tries to prevent a certain pirate from going to war. In Marineford, Shanks intercepted Kaido before he reached the battlefield. Let's remember that Kaido, upon learning of the imminent war, wanted to take advantage of the chaos to attack Whitebeard, or simply cause a commotion. Shanks literally blocked his way, off-screen, obviously, and even with a duel against Kaido in between, he managed to reach Marineford in time to end the war. In God Valley, there was a similar incident. According to what has been revealed in the chapters, Captain Rock's D. Zebek had a confrontation with the Giant King Harold. And yes, until I get used to Rocks, I will keep calling him Rocks. I know his name is Davy D. Zebek, but it will be hard for me to change his name. It seems that Rocks was trying to recruit Harold for his cause, and Harold opposed him. A tremendous battle between Rocks and the Giant Harold. And this giant Herald was sent by the world government to intercept Rocks, making a clear parallel with Kaido and Shanks, where a very powerful pirate goes to war, and there is another who must stop him from going. Only that in the case of Harold and Rocks, we know that it finally did happen. This role of preventing reinforcements could also be repeated in the final war. One possibility is that someone, perhaps an admiral like Fujitora, might try to prevent a certain secondary pirate group from joining the battle. I think, for example, of the cross guild of Buggy, Crocodile, and Mihawk. They might want to join the Chaos for their own agenda, and the Navy will send someone to stop them on the way. Can you imagine Fujitora intercepting Mihawk and company? It would be an interesting clash before the Great War, with Fujitora perhaps doing it by orders, but doubting deep down. It's just speculation, but it fits well in the pattern of God Valley, of Harold against Rocks and Marineford, of Shanks against Kaido. Somehow there would be attempts to sabotage the meeting of certain contenders, although in the end, practically everyone would end up involved. Then we would have the sides of the war, and again, we can draw a certain parallel with God Valley. As for Roger's crew, it would obviously be the Straw Hats, who this time would be reinforced with none other than the great Mugiwara fleet to show that they are stronger, and also providing a strong argument to win, while still drawing a parallel with the person who obviously carries the same will that Luffy carries. Roger's pirates are a mirror, a parallel to the Straw Hats, meaning that the comparison between them is very evident and they will represent Roger's side in this final war. Then on the opposite side, in God Valley, we would have the Rocks Pirates, the most feared crew at the time, making the God Valley incident even more dangerous and more famous among those who know about it. In Marineford, although the main villain was the Navy for executing Ace, we also had Marshal D. Teach, Blackbeard, in the mix. Yes, I will continue to call him Marshal D. Teach, even though his name is Davy D. Teach and his new crew bursting in at the end to take advantage of the chaos. In fact, Blackbeard arrived at Marineford with destructive intentions. He killed Whitebeard and stole his Gura Gura fruit and began to sink Marineford with earthquakes. He himself declared his intention to destroy the entire island using Whitebeard's power. This is a direct parallel with God Valley, as it is known that God Valley ended up destroyed and literally sunk beneath the waves after the battle. Marineford almost met the same fate at the hands of Teach, if not for Shanks arriving in time to stop the madness. Teach chose to retreat upon seeing Shanks. Logical. It's chilling to think that Oda was about to show us another God Valley in the present. Marineford would have disappeared from the map as well, sunk into the sea. If the war had continued a few more minutes, who knows what would have happened? Even Teach himself hinted at it with much sarcasm. This detail connects both events and makes it clear that Marineford was a modern and smaller scale reflection. From God Valley, then we have the legendary figures putting an end to the battle. At Marineford, Shanks, with his mere presence, declares the war over. If anyone still wants to fight, let them come against us. And neither side dared to prolong the conflict after Shanks' arrival. His weight as a Yonkou balanced the battle in that final moment. In God Valley, we know that the official victors were Garp and Roger together, but we also know that Figurlin Garland was involved, who was a holy knight present on the island. This is interesting because now we know that Shanks and Garling are directly connected. Shanks is Garling's son and was born in God Valley, being rescued as a baby by Roger. We could say that Shanks and Garling represent opposite sides of the same coin. Garling served the government in God Valley, and Shanks became a pirate. One initiated the massacre of God Valley, triggering the tournament on that island, and the other stopped the massacre at Marineford. It's a game of generational parallels. I wouldn't be surprised if in the final war Shanks plays a key role again, perhaps facing his father or his twin brother, Figureland Shamrock, which would drive us all crazy. Just imagine the scene, Shanks against Shamrock, twin brothers separated by fate, each on a different side. It would be the perfect rhyme to what happened decades ago with Garling and God Valley. Of course, with Oda, you never know. He might kill Shanks before that war to give us an emotional blow. We know Blackbeard has unfinished business with him. Even so, to date, Shanks has always appeared to balance the wars, and this dynamic could repeat itself. After reviewing all this, it is clear that Oda deliberately mirrored God Valley and Marineford. In fact, Marineford was called the War of the Strongest, a title very similar to how we might imagine God Valley was described in the annals of history. It is no coincidence. Oda was not only showing a great climax in the middle of the series, but also giving us a preview of the scale and structure of the final war. He himself hinted at it in interviews. He commented that the final saga will make the Marineford War look cute or small in comparison, and these statements probably sound familiar because at the time it was said that Marineford would look cute next to the war because of the Wano War. Well, this was a translation error that many people interpreted as they wanted, but Oda was referring all along to the final war. And indeed, something huge is coming. If Marineford was an appetizer, the final war will be the full banquet. We can infer that just as Marineford seemed small compared to God Valley in terms of danger, let's remember that practically all the legends were at God Valley. Roger, Garp, Rayleigh, a young Whitebeard, Big Mom, a young Kaido, Shaki, some Gorosei around, the God's Knights, even Dragon, Baby Shanks, Teach. The final war would eclipse Marineford because even more powerful people will gather in one place, with much higher stakes. Let's not forget that after Marineford, Luffy rang the Ox Bell and married Jawaz 16 times, symbolically marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. It was a prelude to the dawn that is about to come. The true fight for the Dawn, the one that will decide the fate of the world, is destined to occur soon in the story. And speaking of destiny, chapter 1159 of the manga is titled The Island of Destiny, alluding to God Valley. Oda practically hints that God Valley was an island where destiny brought together great names for a transcendental event. Think about the incredible coincidence, or predestined coincidence, that on this island, Roger and all his crew, Garp and Marine units, Rox and his pirates with future Yonko included, Young Dragon, Garling and all the Divine Knights, some Gorosei, Shanks and Shamrock as babies. Half of the powerful world was in one place. That doesn't happen every day. It seemed almost written by destiny. And now, in the final saga, we are seeing a similar convergence of certain characters towards certain places. In Egghead, there were already quite a few powerful people. In Elbaf too, and even Imu, the king in the shadows, is aware of these cycles. In recent chapters, Imu ordered drastic measures against Elbaf, knowing that the next great war could be brewing there. In fact, Imu has personally gone to the front in Elbaf because he understands that the time for that confrontation has come. That is to say, Emu has lived through several repetitions over the centuries. Possibly he is immortal or of a long-lived race, or something that allows him to live a long time. And he recognized the signs that another war like the one at God Valley is approaching. Another destiny of Joy Boy against Emu, but this time, he senses it could be different. Just as Roger said, now the right moment might truly be arriving. Summarizing the lessons from God Valley and Marineford, we have a clear outline of how the final war will be in terms of its setup and the key pieces involved. Let's look at those elements one by one, and the candidates we have in the present for each role. Continuing with the parallel, the final war would start, as I said, with a kidnapping or capture that would shock the entire world and force all sides to act. Now then, who could be that captured person whose situation unleashes absolute chaos? This is a very difficult question, and I have thought a lot about it. For it to be the greatest war ever seen, the hostage must be someone whose fate matters to multiple factions, not just Luffy. Moreover, it must be such a serious event that even pirates who would not normally collaborate with each other or entire countries would mobilize. So let's evaluate some possibilities. The first, Monkey D. Luffy. If Luffy himself were captured by the world government, it would undoubtedly light a fuse. His allies and fleet would come, as well as his family, Dragon and Garp, but perhaps this situation might feel a bit anticlimactic. Luffy is usually the one who leads, not so much the one who needs rescuing, but as a call to the final war, it works very well in principle. But there's a small problem. Why, for example, would Teach's side show up if Luffy were imprisoned? We might think that Teach could go to eliminate him definitively, or to steal something from him, his devil fruit. But the truth is, it feels a bit strange, and I don't know how it would fit. Then, the character of Shanks could indeed go to protect his bet on the new era, Luffy, because he is his friend, but the character of Teach falls apart for me, and it's a very important side. Then we have the option of capturing Teach. His crew would obviously try to save him, but I doubt that heroes like Luffy would go to rescue Teach. Rather, at most, they might take the opportunity to fight him by force, but it's a bit strange. Besides, Teach would hardly let himself be captured alive at this point. It is more logical for him to be the instigator, not the victim. Another option is Boa Hancock, and many people thought of Boa as a parallel to Shaki. Both were empresses of Amazon Lily, and if Boa were captured by the Navy, let's remember that after the evolution of the Shichibukai, she was already in danger, and Teach even attacked her trying to steal her fruit. Luffy would surely go to rescue her. We already saw how important Boa is to him and his friend, and the debt he feels for her saving his crew. Teach might also be interested because he already tried to capture her once. He wanted the Mero Mero no Mi. However, Boa alone might not attract everyone. For example, would Shanks or the revolutionaries come just for Boa? Her capture would only matter to Luffy and Amazon Lily practically, maybe to Teach, but if he withdrew from Amazon Lily out of fear of Rayleigh, I don't see him being so obsessed as to get involved and risk everything in a great final war for her. Another option is Nico Robin. Robin is a constant target of the government. If the Gorosei or Emu managed to capture Robin, it would be very serious. She is the only one in principle who can read the Poneglyphs. Luffy would go to the ends of the earth to save Robin, as he already did in Enies Lobby. Dragon and the Revolutionary Army appreciate her. Dragon took her in for 2 years. He might have a huge interest in ensuring Robin does not fall into the hands of the world government. Teach might also need Robin to find Laugh Tale, I don't know. Even Shanks might understand the importance of protecting Robin for the sake of the truth of the Void Century. This is a quite strong possibility in terms of the storyline. One downside is that Oda already did an entire arc about saving Robin in Enies Lobby, and repeating it on a larger scale would be symmetrical, but perhaps repetitive, unless now the enemy is Imu or Teach, and the scale is global, of course. Other options are Sabo or Vivi. After the events at Mary Joaz, both Sabo and Vivi have been in danger. Sabo was falsely accused of killing Cobra and was almost captured, although he managed to escape from Mary Joaz with injuries. Vivi disappeared after the reverie, and we know that Imu showed special interest in her. If Imu captures Vivi, that would put Luffy, because of his promise to Cobra and his friendship with Vivi, into action. The revolutionaries too. Sabo and Vivi escaped together. Sabo might have protected her, and perhaps all of Alabasta clamoring for their princess. However, would Teach move for Vivi? Only if there were something to gain, maybe use her to blackmail for Pluton, since Pluton was related to Arabasta or something like that. Sabo in danger, on the other hand, would mobilize Dragon and the revolutionaries. Also Luffy, who is his brother, and even former comrades from the Revolutionary Army. Sabo was already the protagonist of the climax in Lulusia, survived an attack from Imu, and is very beloved by the public. A public execution of Sabo, the assassin of King Cobra, could be the government's move to discredit the revolutionaries and lure Dragon into a trap. Teach might try to steal Sabo's Mera Mera, but he already has enough fruits. Difficult. Another option is Monkey D. Dragon. This option resonates more and more in my mind. Dragon is the most wanted man in the world, leader of the Revolutionary Army. If the government or Teach manages to capture him, it would be the event of the century. Imagine the public execution of Dragon being announced in the plaza of Mary Joaz, in the style of Ace. Luffy would have a powerful personal reason to go. Although he hardly knows his father, it would be his chance to bridge that gap, and obviously he would want to save him because of blood ties and because he is Sabo's mentor, and Sabo and all the revolutionaries would do the impossible to free their leader. The whole world would be watching because Dragon is the symbol of rebellion against the government. His death would be a message of terror for the oppressed people, and his rescue a sign of hope. And Teach? Well, if my suspicions are correct, Teach could be the one orchestrating Dragon's capture. Something like this could happen. Dragon launches an assault on Mary Joaz, which might already be underway because we've seen someone attacking Mary Joaz. Imu and Teach might face off at some critical moment, two villains clashing over different interests, and Teach, with his cunning, could defeat Imu and even steal his fruit, for example, if Imu possesses a mythical fruit like Abyss or some power. And in the midst of that chaos, Teach could capture Dragon, bruised after the battle, and present his capture as a trophy to win over the rest of the government or to lure Luffy into his territory. I can even imagine Teach proposing a public execution of Dragon to show that he now holds the true power of the world government. That is, after having defeated Imu and taken the throne of the world, his introductory act would be having captured the most wanted man in the world, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, and demonstrating that with him, revolutions are over, that now he is the one in charge. It would be the perfect parallel. Teach assumes the role that the Navy had in Marineford, and Dragon assumes the role of Ace as the Condemned. Only this time, the Condemned is the greatest political enemy of the government. A moment like this would definitely make all roads lead to the final war, on that island of destiny, or wherever it may be. Surely it would be Mary Joaz, I suppose. Honestly, the capture of Dragon makes a lot of sense. He fulfills being someone of global importance. He personally connects with Luffy and Sabo, involves the revolutionaries, and therefore every oppressed country allied with them. And it could involve Teach if he positions himself as the new tyrant. Additionally, it would have a strong emotional weight with Luffy meeting his father in extreme circumstances, and also symbolic, the revolutionary leader being judged in the last Great War, a public execution like what happened with Roger that started the Great Pirate Era. Of course, obviously this is a theory, and Oda could surprise us with another victim or even multiple simultaneous captures. I don't rule out that they might capture more than one person. The government could set up a bizarre final coliseum with several sentenced individuals. For example, Dragon, Sabo, and Vivi. Imagine the more bait, the more participants they would attract. In God Valley, there was a tournament perversely organized by the Tenryubito, where Shaki was the prize. The evil of the world nobles reached the point of auctioning human lives in a deadly game. For the final war, it wouldn't be surprising if Imu or whoever is in charge attempts a similar spectacle. A broadcasted public execution, a trap to gather all the enemies in one place. In any case, the outbreak would start with a calculated or prophesied incident involving rescuing someone crucial. Once this catalyst occurs, what sides will we see form in the great final war? If God Valley and Marineford teach us anything, it's that there will be three main factions: the heroes, the revolutionary allied pirates, the villains, the world government and their equivalents, and a third chaotic party, an ambitious pirate with their own style, a Rocks or Blackbeard style. But this time, the lines might cross a little due to unexpected alliances. Let's take a look. The Straw Hats and allies. Roger's heir. This side is clear. Luffy and his crew would be the modern equivalent of Roger and his, that is, the role of the Dawn. However, unlike Roger, Luffy would not go with just 10 members. Luffy has a large fleet of allies, those who swore loyalty to him in Dressrosa, numbering in the thousands. This great Mugiwara fleet will surely gather for the final battle, fulfilling the promise to come when Luffy needs them. This reflects how the pirates in God Valley were strong, but relatively few, while Luffy will have a considerably greater force, because this time the Inherited will must win, and for that, they need more firepower than in previous cycles. We would see characters like Cavendish, Bartolomeo, Shai, Hadrudin, and all the giants all fighting under Luffy's flag. Possibly allied kingdoms would also join, like Dressrosa, Arabasta. If Vili is involved, the Mink tribe, samurais from Wano. It would be a multicolored liberation army led by Luffy. At Marineford, Luffy arrived with a small, heterogeneous group: Ivankov, Inazuma, Jinbei, Crocodile, and even some enemies cooperating. In the final war, that idea will multiply. Former enemies could become allies of convenience. Perhaps we will see Crocodile and Mihawk from Cross Guild fight against the government side by side with Luffy. It is possible, since the Cross Guild hates the government and wants to overthrow its power system. It would echo how Garp and Roger set aside enmities in God Valley for a greater good. The world government and the Knights of God, the traditional villains. The great antagonist is Imu and his entourage, the Gorosei and the Holy Knights. Imu is the equivalent of the evil king who was behind the scenes in past eras. 800 years ago, he was the one who defeated the original Joy Boy. In God Valley, Imu was also present through the Holy Knights. Now, Imu faces the threat of the D again, specifically from Luffy, and is taking desperate measures such as destroying kingdoms like Lulusia, deploying weapons like the Mother Flame, or moving the Divine Knights to Elbaf. We can expect the world government to present in the final war its most terrible weapons: the Gorosei themselves, the God Knights led by Garling and Shamrock, perhaps armies of pacifists or Seraphim if they still control them. However, here comes a variable: Teach, because there is a very strong possibility that by the time the final war reaches its climax, the world government as such will no longer be commanded by Imu, but by Marshal D. Teach, and yes, again I know he is called Davy D. Teach, but I don't care. It sounds crazy, but let's take it step by step. Teach has been consolidating power. Right now, he is a Yonko. He has two OP fruits, the Yami Yami and the Gura Gura, and he always desires more. He has always had an air of a final antagonist against Luffy. He's another with the initial D, heir to the will of rocks in a certain sense. Many fans speculate that Teach could take advantage of the imminent chaos to usurp the throne. Let's imagine that in the first phase of the war, Luffy and allies manage to expose and weaken Imu, maybe destroy some weapon or something like that. Let's imagine, as I said before, that when Dragon and Imu are about to face off, Teach takes advantage, defeats both, finishes off Imu, and is the one to start that final war. This time leading the world government, claiming the power of the empty throne for himself. He could even steal Imu's ability if it comes from a fruit, and we've seen that Imu seems to use a power called Abyss or Shadow Control to possess certain bodies. Blackbeard would become the new world sovereign, and this would be a tremendous twist, but it would fit his character. He wants the world for himself. Let's remember that Rock's Deed Zebek, Teach's ideological mentor, aspired to be king of the world and challenge the celestial dragons. Let's remember that Rock stood before Emu and told him that besides being a fan of Davy Jones, he still couldn't harm him, but that he would return. Well, Teach inherited Zebek's will. Even his base is the former pirate island of Hachinosu, which belonged to Rocks. So Teach could succeed where Zebek failed, defeat Emu, and take his place. And there's a curious detail. One of Blackbeard's ships is called Saber of Zebek, and Blackbeard himself is obsessed with the dark history of the Void Century. He sought out Pudding to read the poneglyphs and knows things about the past. His fruit rarity seems very curious. If Teach takes control of the government or temporarily allies with them, many Marines might follow him. Think about Akainu. Would he obey Teach? Maybe not. Akainu hates pirates, but be careful, because he is still a military man, and having overthrown the current head of the world government and placing himself at levels of power, he might simply consider it as a change of position and everything would remain the same. So, be very careful, because even though Akainu is the way he is, this time Teach would stop being a pirate to become the governor of the world government. In any case, it is possible that we will see a unified band of villains that includes Blackbeard and his crew, plus what remains of the world government. A Blackbeard, perhaps with authority over, for example, the God Knights, would be terrifying, since remember that if, for whatever reason, he takes Imu's fruit and gains its power, he could have control over the God Knights. Can you imagine Teach commanding Garling, Shamrock, and company as if they were his new generals? It could happen if he defeats Imu and steals his fruit. As for Blackbeard's crew itself, it is already parallel to Rock's. Interestingly, many have noticed similarities. Katarina Devon, the Moon Hunter, is a cruel pirate who could be compared to Big Mom physically. Avalo Pizarro also has traits that could be very similar to Kaido, a kind of mirror effect between the two crews, and of course Teach corresponds to Zebek. They are not exact equivalents, but the idea of this worst generation or allied pirates in a single group does somewhat repeat. Teach's side would be the modern incarnation of the Rocks pirates, creating monumental chaos in their wake. Then we would have the Navy divided, justice versus blind loyalty. Within the naval force, a fracture also awaits. Just as in God Valley, there were Marines following orders protecting the nobles, the typical government soldiers, and a Garp who acted on his own justice. In the final war, there would be Marines who switched sides upon seeing the truth. We have already seen seeds of this. Smoker questioned things in Arabasta. Fujitora rebelled against the policy of covering up the slave trade in Dressrosa. Aokiji directly deserted. The good faction of the Marines would probably be led by Kobe, who is presented as the heir to Garp's just spirit. In fact, there is Sword, the secret unit where Drake, Kabi, Helmeppo, etc. are, whose purpose seems to be to act outside the corruption of the government. In the final battle, I imagine Kobe and perhaps old heroes like Smoker, Tashigi, joining Luffy to overthrow the tyrant. It would be poetic. Kobe at Marineford asked for the end of the war and was almost killed for it. And in the final war, Kobe could directly turn his fist against those who perpetuate injustice, completing the cycle of revolution within the Navy. Cycle that Dragon started in God Valley. On the other hand, there would also be Marines loyal to the established power. Akainu would surely stand firm trying to crush pirates and revolutionaries alike, regardless of whether the boss is Imu or the Gorosei or Teach. Characters like Rob Lucci from CP0 would also fight on the dark side until the end, loyal to oppression. This internal tension could lead to Marines fighting against their own during the war. A possible example could be seeing an Akainu versus Sabo, as we saw an ideological clash during the setback. Then we would have the Revolutionary Army, which would be allied with Luffy. It is almost certain that the revolutionaries would fight side by side with the Straw Hats. In God Valley, there was not yet a revolutionary army as such, since Dragon left there with the seed of that idea. Now, after 20 years of activity, the revolutionaries are a global force. Dragon is captured or killed before the war. His commanders, Ivankov, Belovetti, Lindbergh, Morley, Carasso, would take action under Sabo's leadership. In fact, Sabo is already seen as the Emperor of Flames and an inspiring figure after the false news that he killed Cobra and declared war. The death or capture of Dragon would put Sabo in command of the revolutionaries in battle, along with characters like Konkawala. They would provide strategy and coordination among the allied peoples. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the revolutionaries unite the armies of various oppressed kingdoms to rise against the government during the confusion. For example, affiliated countries suffering celestial taxes could rebel simultaneously. Imagine Dressrosa Province, Sakura declaring independence in support of the revolutionary movement. The final war would have multiple fronts, not just on one island, but global protests and uprisings. But the main front would undoubtedly have them fighting alongside Luffy. A dream battle would be Sabo and Luffy together against some admiral. Let's remember that Sabo already fought against Fujitora in Dressrosa, Luffy with Kizaru, but we have never seen them fight together side by side, and seriously. If Dragon survives until the war, obviously he himself would lead his army, but he would be the #1 target of the villains. In any case, the Revolutionary Pirate Alliance would be the embodiment of the liberating army of this era. Other unexpected allies would be these, and here we have characters like Shanks, if he is still alive at this point, Buggy's Cross Guild, and even Luffy's old enemies. And Shanks personally has his own objectives, but he has protected the status in a certain way. He is supposed to have spoken with the Gorosei to warn them about something. However, with his father Garling and his brother Shamrock on the enemy side, it is very likely that Shanks will intervene against them. It may be that Shanks arrives with his entire crew, Beckman, Lucky Row, Yasop, and perhaps his role is to stop some threat, maybe face Teach before the Great War and sacrifice himself. I hope not, but it's possible that Shanks might die at the hands of Teach before the final phase, giving Luffy an even more personal motivation to finish off Teach. If Shanks survives for the final war, I imagine a scenario with Shanks leading the vanguard alongside Luffy, or protecting Luffy from some dirty trick by Teach or Imu amidst the chaos. The long-awaited Shanks versus Blackbeard could happen, finally unleashing their rivalry. Teach already gave Shanks the scar some time ago. Or, as I mentioned before, Shanks versus his brother Shamrock in a battle for the soul of the Figureland family. As for the Cross Guild, it deserves a mention, as Buggy made it clear that he dreams of finding the One Piece, even rallying Mihawk and Crocodile to rival Luffy, Shanks, and Teach. And he might see the final war as his chance to mistakenly proclaim himself a hero or savior or something like that. Mihawk in particular has loyalty only to himself. However, he hates the government since they pursued him after taking away his title of Shichibukai, and he is a friend, or at least respects Shanks. Crocodile holds a grudge against the government, was imprisoned, and also has an ambition for power, so it is not far-fetched that the Cross Guild might end up tactically allied with Luffy to overthrow the government and then perhaps fight over the spoils. It would be hilarious to see a Buggy pretending to lead an allied army in the middle of a war, with his banner offering bounties for marine heads. Also, if Admiral Fujitora appears, he could interact with the Cross Guild, since Izo is against the corrupt system. Maybe Fujitora pretends to fight them, but ends up joining their cause. Many strange alliances can arise in the final battle. As the common enemy, it will be imposing. Then we have the Giants of Elbaf, and there is a very important factor. Since Whole Cake, we were told that whoever has the Giants on their side will dominate the seas. The world government has been trying for centuries to enlist giants in their ranks. Vegapunk himself researched gigantification by their order. Imu himself apparently believes that having the giants on his side is key to winning the Great War. Currently, Luffy has good relations with Elbaf through Dory and Brogy, the giants from Little Garden who reappeared in Egghead, and also Shanks' alliance with the new generation of giants. It is expected that Elbaf will side with Luffy, as the giants value honor, friendship, and their relationship with the D. We have Jaguar D, Saul, who is also an Elbaf. There is an important detail in the recent chapters, and it is that Imu launched a devastating attack on Elbaf and directly confronted the giant warriors and even Scopper Gaba, who was there. This suggests that Elbaf could suffer significant casualties before the final war, perhaps to weaken its impact on the battle. Even so, surely the most important survivors could lead the giants to join Luffy. Imagine rows of giant warriors charging against the pacifists or against government ships. It would be spectacular. The giants can tip the balance. Perhaps they face some massive government weapon, for example, stopping an ancient giant on the opposing side or knocking down walls. Without a doubt, their presence would fulfill the prophecy. With giants on his side, Luffy would have a huge advantage. Then we have the ancient weapons, Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus, the most destructive trump cards in the world, and it makes sense to think they would have a role. Poseidon is Shirahoshi, the mermaid princess capable of commanding the giant sea kings. Pluton is a warship located beneath Wano, and Uranus is theorized to be the same weapon that Imu used to erase Lulusia from the map. In the final war, we could very well see these weapons come into play. However, I have a hunch that their use will be early or limited. If one of the sides were to use the full potential of an ancestral weapon at full force, 100%, the battle would be short or unbalanced. For example, Poseidon could submerge entire fleets with an army of sea kings. Pluton could obliterate an island with a single cannon shot. And Uranus, let's not even mention it. We already saw what it did to Lulusia, so to maintain the tension of individual fights and the epic nature of the characters, Oda might make these weapons cancel each other out or be destroyed before the decisive moment. We could have something like Blackbeard, who manages to seize Pluto, stealing it in Wano through someone telling him it's there. Let's remember that Caribou heard about Pluton and mentioned someone he had to inform, and now he's with Teach. With this Pluton, Teach would have a weapon capable of devastating islands, just his style. On the other hand, Luffy would have Poseidon or Shirahoshi as an ally. I imagine a scenario where before the start of the Great War, we have a Pluton versus Poseidon, and they engage in a kind of titanic duel. Teach could attack Sabaody or some area with Pluton, and Shirahoshi would summon the Sea Kings to stop him. In this fight, it is possible that both weapons will be neutralized, the ship in pieces, perhaps Shirahoshi injured or unable to call more creatures momentarily. That way, when the war on land is at its peak, neither could resort to a cannon shot that wipes everyone out in one go, or the Sea Kings themselves. The fight must be decided the old-fashioned way. Hockey against hockey, fists, swords, and Akuma no Mi. Uranus, on the other hand, could be used by Imu or Teach for an initial devastating act, maybe destroying part of Elbaf or some rebel base or something like that. But be careful, because Vegapunk's consciousness is still out there and they might find a way to sabotage or neutralize it. There is also the possibility that Frankie fulfills Tom-san's dream by using the Pluton blueprints he memorized to build something that counters the original Pluton or Uranus. It would be great to see the Sunny modified with ancient technology. In any case, the ancient weapons will appear, yes, but Oda will be careful that they don't potentially steal all the spotlight from the heroes. They will rather be elements to add drama, for example. A shot from Pluton destroying something beloved that further motivates Luffy, or to force the alliance of factions, everyone against the weapon before continuing to fight each other. With all these players on the board, the final war of One Piece promises to be a monumental chaos, the climax of all the themes of the series. Freedom against oppression, inherited will versus fear, friendship versus hatred, destiny versus free will. Each key piece seems to be already placed or anticipated by Oda, as I have tried to explain. It is no coincidence that so many current elements repeat patterns of past events. Oda has been building this cyclical parallelism for a long time, so that when we are in the middle of the final war, fans can recognize and say, oh look, this is like Marineford but on a grander scale. Oh look, what's happening is what we couldn't fully see in God Valley. It would be a great rhyme of history. During this final war, we might see certain surprises or interesting details, and the truth of the Void Century, for example, could be revealed to the world. More than a surprise, it is a goal. Robin and the knowledge of the poneglyphs will surely come to light. Perhaps in the middle of the final battle, Imu or Teach might try to suppress the truth, and it will be crucial to protect Robin so she can spread it. I imagine a scene of Robin reading the Rio poneglyph and using a Denden Mushi to broadcast the message to the whole world and convey the true story of Joy Boy and the ancient kingdom under the government's tyranny. This would demoralize many Marines and ignite the revolutionary spark on every island. This could be the moral blow that collapses the regime, complementing Luffy's physical victory over Imu or Teach. Then we would have the D. And destiny. Surely we will finally know what the will of D means. The one shared by Luffy, Teach, Garp, Roger, Rox, etc. Many interpret it as dawn or destiny, which we have mentioned before. And it's that Whitebeard, upon dying, said, the legacy of the D will continue to wage war. It may be that we basically discover a formal prophecy about Joy Boy or Toki leaving a message about the year in which the Great War would occur. Let's remember that Toki jumped to the future and died predicting the arrival of the new dawn 20 years later. All these threads would come together. I wouldn't be surprised if Luffy, at some crucial moment, is literally the embodiment of destiny. For example, that the ancient spirits of Will-bearers, Roger Joy Boy, symbolically manifest behind him in the final fight. Something like saying, we are with you. Or maybe it's too much of a shonen cliche, but come on, Oda loves mythological drama. Then we have the sacrifice of a symbol. It could even be someone like the red-haired one. It could be anyone, but we might have someone who, for example, dies protecting Luffy from an attack by Teach, explaining the sacrifice of Ace at Marineford. But this time, as I say, with Shanks or Garp giving their life to stop even Akainu or Teach and save their grandson this time. Any of those deaths would further ignite Luffy's determination at the climax. Oda usually hits hard in those acts. He already did it with Ace, Yasuya, and Wano, so we can prepare for possible tears before victory. In short, the keys to the final war are already planted in the story. God Valley and Marineford gave us the structure, beginning with a kidnapping, defined sides, internal betrayals in the villain's side. Let's remember that Ochaku betrayed Rox by selling out Shaki. Squardo briefly betrayed Whitebeard by deceiving Akainu, surprising appearances that decide the course, Garp who suddenly appeared in God Valley, Shanks who appeared to stop the war, and an outcome that marks the entire change of the era. The final war will take all that and push it to the extreme. Oda has been playing with the concept of destiny in a very subtle way, so that in the end everything makes an impressive sense. When we see the Great War unfold, many will say this was already hinted at 500 chapters ago. It will be like fitting the last piece of a puzzle that is right in front of us. In conclusion, the theory of a cyclical destiny in One Piece, where events from the past are reflected in the future, is more relevant than ever. It's not that the story repeats exactly, but that there is a kind of cosmic script in the world, and it's the will of D. Always finds a bearer, darkness always has a face, and very soon Teach, and that the clash between them is inevitable until the cycle of oppression is broken. Oda has been preparing us for that decisive moment using historical parallels, God Valley against Marineford, and references to destiny in the words of characters. We know that this time is different. Joy Boy has returned. The table is set with all the pieces. The Poseidon weapon awakens, allies of all kinds, Emu revealed, and even the enemy senses it. The last great war will be the climax where that destiny is finally fulfilled or broken. Personally, it excites me to think about how Oda could surprise us even knowing this general framework, because if there is something that characterizes One Piece, it is that, even though we know where we are going, Luffy will face the final villain and seek the One Piece, and how we get there always exceeds our expectations in creativity and excitement. Perhaps the final war will bring unexpected twists, like the appearance of the original Joy Boy in a flashback that inspires everyone in the present, or the liberation of thousands of slaves from Mary Joaz joining the revolt. Anything is possible. In any case, it is clear that Eiichiro Oda has woven his story like a great circle. Ancient events shape future events, and the concept of destiny gives the saga an aura almost of epic legend. We are approaching the moment when that destiny will fully manifest in the narrative, and if the clues do not deceive us, the final war of One Piece will be an event so colossal and so full of moments parallel to God Valley, it will blow our minds. As Oda said, Marineford will seem like just a tale or something cute compared to what's coming. Buckle up and enjoy the journey towards the dawn, because we are about to witness the culmination of this era of pirates, where, now indeed, the fate of the entire world will be decided, and this time, Luffy and his allies will manage to break the cycle. The vicious circle from 800 years ago will finally close, giving way to a new beginning full of freedom, the dawn that so many have awaited. And this is today's theory, how Oda, through Marineford and God Valley, has already explained to us how the final war will unfold. I think I have given enough arguments. I think I have been able to explain to you how the final war will be. I think it has turned out to be quite a long video, and I think you will be very happy with the theory, because we have touched on many parallels. It is also possible that I may have overlooked something, some detail you heard and want to mention in the comments, and you're wondering why I didn't say it. If that's the case, leave it in the comments, because you know I love reading your thoughts, and I want you to share everything you think about the theory. If you liked it, if yes, if no, why? Why not? Leave it all in the comments, because I love reading your thoughts, and this helps me create better theories in the future. Also, obviously, if you liked it, say to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to see more videos,